Bonjour, Stephanie here. Before we get started, I wanted to draw your attention to the amazing benefits of being a Gospel Spice newsletter subscriber member. It's completely free. It gives you access to exclusive giveaways that are only for our subscriber list and monthly gifts directly into your inbox. I'm talking about gorgeous downloads of beautiful items that our Gospel Spice team is creating just for you, exclusively available to our newsletter subscribers. So sign up now, gospelspice.com/sign up. You really don't want to miss out, believe me. And now, our podcast episode of the day.
Bonjour, and welcome on the Gospel Spice podcast, where you are invited to taste and see that the Lord is good. Gospel Spice is your Christ-centered podcast, infused with in-depth biblical flavors and sprinkled with a dash of French culture to spice up your relationship with God.
Here is your host, Stephanie Roussel, with a guest today.
Bonjour, I'm inviting you into a very whimsical conversation today with my guest, Joy Clarkson. She is a delightful American who currently lives in the UK, in Scotland to be exact. She is an author, podcaster, editor. She's a research associate in theology and literature at King's College in London. Her book, You Are a Tree, was such a delight for me to read. It's one of the most pleasant books I've read in the past few months, maybe even year or so. And so not a book to rush through, a book to enjoy, kind of like this conversation. So Joy Clarkson, welcome on the Gospel Spice podcast.
I'm very excited to be here today.
It's so good to have you. I love what we were just saying off the air, how you have a little bit of a British accent. Can you tell us about who you are, your story, and how come this American is talking with a British accent to this French girl who has an American accent? How did that happen?
It sounds like both of us are potted plants, as I talk about in my book.
That's a metaphor we're going to need to explore. Tell us more about you first and how you ended up writing this beautiful book. We're going to talk about You Are a Tree. But before we go there, tell us about Joy Clarkson.
I live in Scotland, but I teach at King's College London. And I've been in Scotland for 8 years now, which feels like a very long time. I feel like I'm not old enough to have been somewhere for 8 years and have been an adult when I came, but here I am.
You were extremely young when you moved to Scotland.
Yes, I did my PhD here at the Institute for Theology and the Arts. So I studied kind of how the arts can nourish our faith and their interactions with Scripture. And I've gone on to teach that. I have my own podcast. And I came to write this book because I've kind of been fascinated with, and I can say more about this, but the ways in which the metaphors that we use to describe our lives shape how we live them, and also how metaphorical Scripture is. And then I think that it's not an accident, but that it reflects kind of the mysteriousness of life and how we have to draw on the plentiful imagery of the world to be able to describe things like love and wisdom and what it looks like to flourish as a human being.
So tell us about metaphors. You just said how we as human beings need them. I think the way I'd like to say is that we don't have words to describe a sunrise or a sunset, let alone describe the intricate journey of life or our experience with God. Words fail us, and yet words are also the most complete way that we can describe our experiences as well. So tell us about metaphors, and then maybe give us an example of what you are walking us through with one of them in your book.
So I think that as human beings, we have a desire to put things into words, and it's really important that we can put things into words, that we can I think the reason that's important is that when we have experiences, we want to be able to talk about them with other people and to understand them. But when you have an experience like love or loss, in a way, it's kind of it's not abstract. It is a part of our experience, but it's not something you can point to and say that's what love exactly looks like. Can't quantify it. So it's this kind of invisible thing. So metaphors are the things that we reach for to kind of give a shape to invisible things. So they're the tangible and the visible things that we use to describe our kind of intangible and invisible experiences that are important to us. So an example of that I had fun writing about in the book is the idea of wisdom, which we use the language of light for. And you may think, I don't use the language of light. I don't use the metaphor of light for wisdom. But it's all in all the words we use to talk about wisdom or knowledge. So we might say, oh, that was an illuminating conversation I had on the Gospel Spice podcast. And that word illuminating it's a light metaphor that on this conversation, we learned something was cast light on. Or we can talk about lucidity. When someone thinks clearly, that is a word that means light. Or we can talk about someone being a bit dim. And if we say that, we mean that they're kind of stupid. But by stupid, we use the language of not having very much light, that they're not very wise. And that's an example of wisdom is something it's not just a list of things we know. We know that there's kind of something amorphous, mysterious about wisdom. And so we use the language of light to describe it because it casts a vision of what wisdom is like, that it gives us a path to walk on, right? Light shows us where we should go. And if someone's wise, they see clearly and they know where they should go and how they should proceed. And it also brings out other aspects of wisdom, like that wisdom is something that's not just acquired, right? Wisdom isn't just, I learned a whole bunch of facts. It's a gift that orients me, right? It's something that, when scripture says that the beginning of wisdom is to get wisdom, it's the sense that to be wise, you have to face wisdom and let it kind of cast its rays on you so know where you go. So I think that there's this relationship between the external world, that we have these experiences, and that we use those experiences to describe things that are maybe invisible or interior. But that in doing that, we then see things we wouldn't have noticed, both in the physical world and in the invisible world.
What you're doing is that you're acting as my guide as I read your book, because you're sharing your own experiences through these 7 metaphors. And you're inviting me to ponder how these metaphors can teach me about my own identity. Truly, it's about my identity, my relationship with God, my relationship to the world. And so metaphors really help us in that sense. So, in the book, you share some very practical, personal examples, but you invite us very elegantly into our own introspective journey. And obviously, we need to talk about the title of the book, which is the first of the 7 metaphors you're using. You are a tree, which I think you can have used any of your 7 metaphors for the title, but the fact that you chose you are a tree, I think is actually very symptomatic of our culture. And I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about that.
Yes. So I could have used any of the metaphors, but this one was kind of essential, because one of the other things that I was thinking about when I was writing the book is how often we use metaphors of machines and computers. And it makes sense that we do that, right? If metaphors are using things that are visible and tangible to describe our interior world, then in the modern world, something that surrounds us all the time is machines. We see machines everywhere we go. You and I are podcasting, and at least on my end, I have at least 3 machines. I have my microphone, my computer, my AirPods. So if we see machines everywhere, it makes sense that we use those as metaphors for our lives. But I think it can be quite dangerous, because there are various ways in which human beings are not like machines. If we think about human beings as machines, right? So we talk about recharging, or I'm going to update my friends, or, even if someone's really productive, we'll literally say, you're a machine. And all of these kind of this language, or even like when we have a change in life, we talk about adjusting, like it's kind of like something you could screw in tighter, or all these things kind of invite us to imagine ourselves as a machine. And the problem with that is that, well, we're not machines, but machines, you can expect the same thing of them every day. They are made for a purpose. They're made for use specifically. Their purpose is use. It's some kind of task that it can accomplish. And they are not very resilient. So if you break a pretty essential part of a computer, it'll just be broken. You throw it out, you replace it with a new one. And all of these are ways in which humans aren't like that, right? We aren't capable of the same thing every day. We have seasons, whether that's seasons of life. When you have little tiny kids, you will always be sleep deprived, and there's nothing you can do about it. And you won't be as capable as you were when you were 21 and you were in college of the same kinds of things. You'll be very capable of other things, but you have seasons. But also we don't, you can't fix us by just adjusting something or turning a knob. In many ways, we are much more complex than machines. We are more like an organic organism, right? Like a tree. We need lots of different things that contribute to us, but we're also more resilient than machines. I was speaking with someone else on another interview, and she was talking about a 100-year-old tree that fell down near the river by her house. But then because its roots were still in the water, it sprouted up with new trees. So we have this resiliency in us that is not machine-like. And so we would be tempted to regard ourselves as kind of disposable and broken if we don't act like machines. And so the reason I chose You Are a Tree as the title is that I wanted with the book to kind of the global thing I wanted to do was to meditate on kind of what I call ancient metaphors that have lasted for a long time for a reason. Not to do away with the machine metaphors, because I don't think they're all wrong. There are ways in which we can find good machines and good metaphors machines, but to create a kind of more holistic sense of what it is like to be a human being. And so the reason I chose the tree is that that's one of the most common metaphors that we find in scripture for human beings. We think about Psalm 1 that the book opens with that says, the righteous person is like a tree that's planted by streams of living water that bears its fruit in season and its leaf does not wither. And it's all through scripture. Jesus describes himself and he says, remain in the vine and to be fruitful. And he talks about good fruit, bad fruit. And trees are second to human beings, the thing that is most mentioned in scripture. And I think the reason it's second to human beings is because they're often kind of side by side. It is this metaphor for human beings that God uses in scripture to help us see ourselves in the world. And so I chose that metaphor as the title because it to me it's kind of the contrast. There's machine and there's tree. And I want to kind of get into the roots of that deeper metaphor.
And interestingly, you start off by comparing yourself to a potted plant. If you can just briefly tell us how that all started, thinking about yourself as a potted plant. And I can relate. I have had similar life experiences, and the potted plant metaphor, I was right there with you, and how maybe you're not so much a potted plant anymore. And that's a good thing.
Yes. So that I always have to stop myself because I can go into the very long, rambly version of the story. But at the end of the day, the story happens, it opens the book, and it was after I'd finished my doctoral studies and I was moving out of my house. And I have moved, my family moved a lot when I was a child. My mom would always say, we moved 16 times and 6 times internationally. And then when I did my own studies, basically
sounds like something my kids are going to say too.
I turned out okay, so it's fine. At least I think. Anyway, but and then when I did my own studies, I moved once a year until I lived in this one flat for 27 months, and it was wonderful. And I was sitting on my stoop, getting ready to leave this flat, and I was trying to decide what to do with this little potted plant that I had. And I'd kept it alive while I was finishing my PhD, and it was starting to look a little bit scraggly because it had kind of outgrown its pot. And I felt kind of like I couldn't just throw it away in the garbage, but then I thought, well, I can't take it with me, or maybe I could give it to a friend, but it was kind of an ugly plant, so I felt kind of guilty burdening someone with this less than lovely gift. And I just had this moment where I thought, I feel like a potted plant. I have grown. Right? I am growing. I can feel that, but I'm getting too big for my pot. But then I also had this fear of, if you've ever tried to plant a potted plant, sometimes they just die because their roots aren't prepared for the soil. And I thought, what if I'm not able to root? And even if I can root, how would I know where to root? And so that's where that metaphor came from. But for me, being able to just put that into words and describe kind of the pain or the problem that I was experiencing helped me have kind of a way to think about moving forward. And even if that didn't mean finding a place to root, which it hasn't exactly meant yet, although I have been in Scotland quite a long time for me, it helped me know that what I needed was to think of myself as a tree and think, well, what do trees need? What is it that the potted plant of my soul is in need of and not getting? And it was things like rootedness. I needed to root somewhere. If it wasn't in a place, it needed to be in a community of believers. It needed to be, it was at that stage in my life where I was asking big questions about relationships and marriage. And so bringing that to the forefront of my mind gave me a way to think and pray about what choices I needed to make next. And the last couple of years of my life, in many ways, have been kind of that journey of planting and finding more sources of nourishment and not kind of living the portable life, even though I haven't necessarily found the place to belong in that Wendell-Berryan kind of ancestral farmland way.
And again, I love how you, through your story, you're very vulnerable. You share your story throughout the book with your examples. You really invite us to take the time to ponder these things. And so your book is the opposite of TikTok. It really is. Like this, we're not talking about 15-second practical solution to a practical problem. You're inviting us to put down our roots through your book and to take the time to ponder and digest what you're talking about. Okay, question for you. As you were talking, describing the last couple of years of your life, your book, is just coming out. And that means that understanding how publishing works, you probably finished writing it a little over a year ago, unless I'm mistaken, maybe 18 months ago. So that means that you wrote it roughly 2 years ago, to simplify, which is when you're saying that you had some stability coming into your life. You shared with me, you just got married last summer. So you were probably beginning a serious relationship with your now husband as you were writing the book. So how were you able to write all of this and that at the same time be in a rather upheaval of a season in your own life at the same time?
I think that was, in a funny way, why I was able to write this book at this stage of my life. It's funny, I wrote another book called Aggressively Happy, which is this kind of humorous collection of essays on why not to be a cynic. And when I think about that, I wrote that at what I might call a winter season in my life. It was a lot of long kind of putting in work and hoping it would go somewhere, but not really knowing if it would. And I wrote it during lockdown. I wrote it during this just kind of long wintry season. And I feel like at this point, I'm kind of in the springtime of my life, in the sense that that long winter is kind of suddenly bursting into a spring. And with all of these possibilities and choices and kind of, to use the journey metaphor, choosing this road and not another road, choosing this job and another job, this person, another person. And so in a funny way, I think being able to write this book was a way of, I don't know how to say it, digesting or kind of the experience of the potted plant metaphor, being able to put into words some of the things that I was pondering and wrestling with. And in a funny way that I realized actually recently, I did not intend to do this at all, but my last book ended talking about my flat in St. Andrews. And then this book, and it started with talking about leaving that flat. And so it's funny, I don't think of myself as an autobiographical writer. I like to think of myself, to give us a $10 word, I like to think about myself a little bit as a phenomenological writer, in the sense of writing about like our experiences and how much meaning there is just in something like watching a sunrise, things like that. So I don't think of it as much about my personal story arc. But at the same time, I can see how this book was really born of this season of my life, in which I kind of felt invited to slow down and pay attention to my life and see the richness and the meaning and that was there. And that's really what I want the book to be, is as you were saying that, to invite people to pay attention to their lives. And I mean that both in the sense of what season you're in. Maybe you are in a winter season. Maybe you're in a summer when everything where you're just getting to enjoy the frenzy that was spring. But to pay attention to your life and where you are in it and what God has for you in it, but also just to pay attention to the experiences you have. And I don't mean anything profound. I mean, drinking a cup of tea in the morning and feeling the warmth and thinking about how the warmth of tea is a metaphor we use for love and comfort, that we speak about someone being warm because warm things are comfortable and they enclose us. You know, Julian Norwich always talks about God's love enclosing us. And so that's, I think, what I want people to get out of the book is just a sense that your ordinary, everyday sunrise and the tree out your window and the experience of carrying something heavy, all of those things are just bursting with meaning, that they can reveal something about God's life in the world, and that the world has this integrity that allows you to read it and find poetry in your everyday experiences.
It's an invitation to slow down by choice, as opposed to what COVID lockdowns did to us 3 or 4 years ago. Now it's an invitation to realize, well, what are the things maybe we've learned from having to slow down in ways we didn't want to? Well, now maybe we're beginning to see there's some quality to a slowed down life. And the fact that you are role modeling it by being somewhat autobiographical is the only way for you to have credibility in my eyes as I'm reading you, because otherwise it would feel very academic. And one thing, by the way, one thing I absolutely loved is how well written this is, by the way. Oh my God, such a delight, such a feast of words. It's beautifully written, but it's not academic at all. Because it is somewhat autobiographical, I can relate to you. I can enter the experience with you. I can listen to you, read your words as a wise friend, bringing a light into my own life. And to switch metaphors, and I'd love to talk about this one, you provide a very safe space, a very safe environment for me to explore my own relationship with God and to ask Him for deeper intimacy, deeper safety within the fortress, the shield that He is. So safety as a fortress is one of the metaphors you use. Tell us more about it.
You asked about kind of those upheaval and those times of change. And I think a lot of times what we search for in times of huge change is places of security and safety and stability. And so that chapter is kind of about how we use the metaphor of height as safety and something being lower down as being unsafe. So I talk a lot about, there's so many words we use about down under that mean to be threatened or to be failure, right? So we talk about the underdog, being down and out, being under someone's control, right? All of those down words have this kind of imagery of being controlled, being under threat, or in some way kind of underperforming, right? We talked about it's like going under a thing. So it has a sense of lack of safety, being controlled and not succeeding. Whereas, we talk about someone being at the top of their career, of being
top
on top
dog
of,
versus the underdog. Yeah,
exactly. All those things. And so I started kind of thinking about this, and Scotland's actually an interesting place to think about it because, there were all these wars and kind of conflicts over little regions in Scotland. And one of the main ways to like be safe was to have quite literally a castle on a hill. So there's this huge castle, an Edinburgh Castle, if you've been there, and you can see on a good day for literally like, I'm bad at math and I'm going to doubt myself, but I think you can see for hundreds of miles in either direction, right? And it was a good spot
on
to
a sunny day.
On a sunny day, which to be fair is very rare. But hypothetically you could. And so I started thinking about that metaphor of height. And I thought, well, of course, being up here in this castle, in this stronghold is safety because you have perspective, you have time to react, and you have kind of a posture of attack. And so I started dwelling on that and thinking about my own experiences of insecurity or not, because really insecurity is not feeling safe. It's feeling like you might get judged, might get pushed out, might not succeed. And I started to think about how many kind of areas in our life we treat like strongholds. So, Proverbs talks about for the wealthy man, his tower is his wealth, but the Lord is a strong castle or stronghold. And so we use things like wealth, like looks, like intelligence, like to make ourselves feel safe. But all of those things are kind of, they are crumbling castles, right? They are things that can be taken away pretty quickly, whether it's by a financial crash, or by someone just not thinking we're smart, or by, there's so many ways that those things can fade or be lost. So thinking about the metaphor of finding safety in God was really helpful to me, but also thinking about when I feel threatened or vulnerable, how can I gain perspective, just like the castle on the hill? What can you do when you're feeling down to kind of draw back and have a bird's eye view? What can you do to give yourself time to react? So many times the things I regret were when I felt kind of pinned in a corner and I reacted rather than kind of choosing my actions. And how can I kind of put myself in a posture where I am acting out of feeling safe rather than out of feeling threatened? And so kind of that combination of things was just really fun for me to think about from the experience of being in Scotland and standing on that tall castle, but also just practically helpful for me to think about what to do with this kind of messy feeling of insecurity that we all get sometimes. And it's not just a feeling. Sometimes we really aren't safe. Sometimes there really are things in our lives that are threatened. And so thinking about the ways in which we can make ourselves safe or find safety in God was really meaningful for me.
Tell us about how the London Tube has anything to do with that.
Yes.
You and I we were joking how, we both love London. You work there, as you said. I used to live there. I was there not too long ago. I just love London. My husband and I are considering maybe one day moving back there, among other things. And so, but yes, I would have to agree with you. The London Tube is not my favorite part of London, not any more than the Parisian subway, to be quite honest, or any of those big city subways, especially in Europe. It's a little different in the States. But tell us about the London Underground subway and how that taught you about your own maybe irrational fears, but maybe not quite so irrational, really deep down. No pun.
So I opened that particular chapter talking about just how much I do not love being on the London Underground, right? You go deep down into the underground and it's warm, and you don't know where the warm wind is coming from, and then the tourists get stuck and you feel guilty about how angry you feel in your heart at the tourist for stopping the flow of traffic. And then you get stuck. And I will say, actually, this is an aside. Now my commute doesn't involve the Bakerloo line, and I feel significantly less negative about the tube now that I'm
there you go. So you really have a thing against that particular line, right? The Bakerloo line.
Yeah, the Bakerloo line is not my friend. But and I think I just particularly feel anxious in the underground. It's like I do it. I always think to myself, for someone who's quite anxious about traveling in general, I do it a lot, and I'm very proud of myself for that.
Congratulations! That's
thank you.
But that is a true victory, right? Because if it wasn't a big deal for you, then okay, whatever, right? Yeah. So I hear you. That's something to celebrate. Talk about, you're saying it's not about the big moments of life. It's about pondering the little things, the subway rides, and the sunrises and sunsets. They go together.
Things. Well, and I realized that a lot of my anxiety around the subway is because it's underground, so you're kind of trapped. It's small. You're with other people. And then that just visceral experience of when you get out of the subway and you come into, especially Paddington. Paddington's a very open,
I love Paddington.
Cool, yeah, very open, cool station. And that experience of coming out and coming up is just such a triumph. And so that's kind of where I started thinking about how, for me, viscerally, being down and under in the Bakerloo line feels anxious, threatened, down with the crowd, whereas coming up and on top feels like this victory. And so that was my meditation on an ordinary experience that helped me think about the experience of safety. And I will actually say, I think in my memory, I liked the Parisian underground slightly better.
I would like to agree, but maybe that's going to come across as arrogant if I say.
No, I think it's a little bit better. But of course, the Germans beat us all.
Yes, that's right. And the Moscow the subway stations are the most beautiful in the world. But I've
never been. Well, actually,
I've been either. But I've seen so many pictures. They're literally art museums.
Yeah.
Absolutely gorgeous. So it's interesting because you named the book "You Are a Tree," and I think that was a good title. But you really, if you had named it "God is like Paddington Station," that would work quite so much, right? But that's kind of what you're saying, because coming up in this triumphant, light-filled area of Paddington Station is like a relationship with God. It's you again, and you know, it talks about light, it talks about height, it just weaves so many of your metaphors together right there. Speaking of, let's continue with the metaphors. I'd love to talk about and switching topics, but the heaviness of sadness. And you make a very good point saying that is sadness heavy or is it a heavy thing? Now, I had never asked myself that question. So you really got me thinking there. Can you tell us what you mean by that?
We use a lot of language of weight or heaviness when we talk about sadness. We talk about being heavy-hearted, about feeling burdened. You know, all of those things talk about kind of a sense of heaviness or weightiness. But there's a difference, I think, between feeling heavy with sadness and feeling like you have a burden. And the reason I describe this as different things is that heaviness is a quality of a thing, right? A brick is just heavy. It can't be less or more heavy unless something magical and physical takes place, right? It just is heavy. So heaviness is a quality.
And actually in Hebrew, the word glory, kabod, means heavy, weighty, right? So
weighty.
Glory is weighty, you know, the weight of glory. I mean, C.S. Lewis there is it's a play on words because by definition, glory is weighty, it's dense, it's present. It just has more gravitas to it than anything else. And so it's not a bad thing in itself.
No, heaviness is not a bad thing in itself. Even the word you use is gravitas, or gravity, sense of weightiness. When we describe something as a burden, we do something kind of interesting, which is that we externalize it from ourselves, right? A burden is something that is not a part of me. If I am depressed, then
I might disagree with my few extra pounds of fat that I do not wish to bear. But besides that, I agree with you.
So if I am depressed, which is also an image of being kind of literally weighed down, there's nothing I can really do to get that out of my body, right? It's just a state of being. It's a quality. Whereas when we describe something as a burden, it's something that we can set down. So I was actually thinking about this the other day when I was walking. I didn't put this in the book, but when we cry, we say it's a release, right? And that's like releasing a burden, setting it down. It's like not carrying the weight. So I think there's something important about being able to describe our sadness as a burden because it allows us to kind of put it distance from ourselves, to think about how we can carry it. So do I need to set this down for a little while? Do I need to give it to somebody else? And I think that there's something strategic and helpful about that it also allows us kind of to look at the sadness. Do you know what I mean? If it's something that's outside of me, I can peer at it. I can say, well, I'll take this sadness, but I think I'll let this part of it go. And even that, talking about letting things go, right? It is that sense of carrying something around with you. So that's what I mean by kind of the difference between a burden and heaviness, a heavy thing or heaviness. And I think a really important part of that is also realizing that we don't have to carry things on our own, that other people can help us bear burdens, and that makes them more bearable.
Because it's easier for them to put them down when it's heavy for them to carry, when it's not their own burdens they're carrying. And that's why we need community. And I love to be the safe space when I'm holding space for someone so that they can uncharge their burdens on me. I'll help them carry them because it doesn't weigh the same for me as it does for them. And so it's easier for me to put it down and not let it burden me the way it burdens them. And so, and again, and vice versa, like when I enter the other safe space that someone gives me for my own burdens, that's how community works indeed. As we're beginning to wrap up, okay, you did something masterful with the last chapter, because initially it might feel as we're reading that it's a collection of metaphors that are connected, but they all display different elements of our life. And then in the last chapter, you just tie it all together so masterfully, because you make us realize that all 6 metaphors actually fit inside a 7th one. Life is a journey. As you wrote this for the last chapter, what are you hoping your reader is going to get out of that final chapter?
It's funny. I think, we talk about life as a journey, and it kind of has a little bit of a kitschy phrase to it, right? A kitschy feeling to it. But what I wanted them to get is in some ways to begin to feel at home with the kind of pilgrimage element of life. So, I begin by talking about being a tree and needing to be rooted and needed to be nourished. But when I was looking at Psalm 1 as the basis for the book, that psalm actually starts with a journeying metaphor. It talks about not sitting or standing and if there is something almost as prevalent as the metaphor of people as trees, it's this sense of life being a journey, that we start somewhere and we're going somewhere. And, Hebrews talks about kind of the great hall of faith, as I like to think of it. But it's this sense of people walking somewhere where the destination is something that they can't see. And metaphors themselves, I think, always keep in view that which you can't keep in view, right? They're always speaking about the mystery of things that is bigger than our words can capture. And so in that chapter, I talk about all the different ways that, if life is a journey and all our experiences are encompassed in life, then it makes sense that all of the other metaphors would be encompassed in this metaphor. So I talk about the tree that's journeying, that's kind of the image that we're given in the Psalms. But also one of my favorite ones is the sense of the gravity that kind of puts our feet one's in front of the other. The beautiful language that Augustine gives it of the weight of love. Mm-hmm. And I guess where I wanted to end with also this sense was to end with the metaphor of home, because journeying and going somewhere, life being a journey that is headed somewhere, it has that sense of somewhere that we won't reach in this lifetime. And I love home because home itself is kind of a metaphor, right? There's not one home in the world that we say, well, that is home. But we take our experiences of belonging, of safety, of feeling loved, of feeling nourished. And when we experience something, we say that is home. And so I think I wanted to leave readers with this sense that you can pay attention to every part of your life and find meaning and beauty in it, but also to kind of push them beyond that into this longing for something that will kind of stir up our heavenly longings, if you wanted to put it that way, that it'll stir up our desire for the home that we remember, even though we haven't experienced it.
And that's what it is with those metaphors. You invite us to ponder life. You invite us to find through those metaphors really meaning to life within our relationship with God. And I love that. And as I was listening to you, I was realizing, gospel spice, that's a metaphor too, because scripture doesn't taste a particular way. Elijah would tell you maybe it tastes like honey, but it just really, it's the same idea of we want to taste and see that the Lord is good. We don't literally taste and see that the Lord is good. And yet somehow we do too. That's a metaphor as well. So just to wrap things up, You Are a Tree is a beautiful book that I cannot recommend you enough. I would say read it slowly. There's 7 chapters. I would say read it over your morning quiet time or whenever you have time. I love how, we didn't mention this, but at the end of every chapter, you offer avenues to think and pray deeper. So you offer works of art, whether they be paintings or music or symphonies or anything, and novels, books to read as well. So further resources, and you do such a beautiful job. I want to go back and check out every single resource that you offer there. I checked out a couple and it really did help me in going further in my meditations about that. So I love that as well. Your publisher, Bethany House, is offering 3 copies through Gospel Spice. So anyone listening, if you want to win a free copy, you need to subscribe to the Gospel Spice mailing list, and you will be able to sign up to win a chance to win one of 3 copies of You Are a Tree by Joy Clarkson. And I think that's a beautiful thing. So as we're ending, Joy, one last thing. What's the journey you want your audience to experience? Who would you like to pick up this book? Where are they starting? And then again, you've described a bit where you want them at the end of the journey, but maybe tell us about who you wrote this for as they are cracking the first page open.
So I'm going to use some of your own metaphor. I think this book is written for people who feel like their experience of the world and of their faith right now is a little bit bland. So I think in your original questions to me, you had a request for a metaphor of a spice. And I was thinking about salt, which I know is kind of funny, but Scottish people do think of salt as a spice. And salt has the capacity to draw out richness and flavors that are already there. And that's what I want the book to do. I want it to help you slow down and see that the world is rich and beautiful and flavorful, that there is meaning and direction and nourishment kind of at your fingertips in the world. And it meant a lot to me that you said it was well written, because I wanted, if nothing else, for it to be beautiful, for people to kind of read it and then go, sunrises are really cool. Not that any of us really need to remember that sunrises are cool, but
But you might need the reminder to go out and look at it.
Yes.
Because we forget, we take it for granted, we ignore it, we let the hustle and bustle of life prevent us from actually experiencing it. So what you're creating is the space to make us desire to experience these things. And again, written so beautifully, truly. I'm not a native English speaker, but I do love words, and beautifully written for sure.
Thank you. So that's my hope, is that it will flavor life a little bit and bring out the intensities that are already there, and leave people feeling a little more in awe of the poetry of life and of the meaning that God has stitched into our everyday experiences.
And I think you accomplished that very well. It certainly did that for me. So thank you for that. So Joy Clarkson, thank you so much for joining us today. You are a tree, and other metaphors. You really do not want to miss it. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi, Jonah here. Thank you for being part of the Gospel Spice family. If you've enjoyed this episode, you will love receiving our newsletter. It contains value-packed free gifts and rich content each month. It's at gospelspice.com/sign-up. There is always something new and exciting happening around here, and I don't want you to miss out. Sign up at gospelspice.com/sign-up. Did you know Gospel Spice has a YouTube channel? There's exclusive content there too, so join Gospel Spice on YouTube. Also, please give us a star rating and a comment on your podcast listening app. Your reviews actually really do make a difference to help others discover and experience Gospel Spice. As always, we are praying for you. You can confidentially email us your prayer requests and praise items at the email address contact@gospelspice.com. It's our privilege to pray for you. So, I'll leave you with 4 things to do. Please pick one and do it at your convenience. 1. Sign up on our website for our newsletter to receive gifts you're going to love. 2. Find us on YouTube and see what content we've put together to help you grow closer to Jesus. 3. Rate Gospel Spice on your listening app. It's one of the easiest ways to share the gospel. And finally, 4. Tell us how we can pray for you. Merci.